Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to week 4 of the Covid-19 My Business, What Do I Need to Do? Funded by the Humber Growth Hub. Today, as usual, we're going to provide you with a panel of specialist business advisors and consultants to provide you with support across a wide range of topics. Joining us today, we have Peter Daniel, Blue Orchid Senior Business Advisor, who's going to provide you with an update on all of the general government support that's available for businesses and the self-employed, all of the up-to-date schemes that have been researched by our team over the last week or so, and we'll provide you with updates regarding that. Followed by Peter, we will speak with Mike Byrne, Blue Orchid Business Advisor and Accountant, who's going to give you an update on all financial and legal information you need to be aware of at this moment in time. And to complete section 1 of our newly designed agenda, we'll hand over to Kellie Calvert, Director of Humber HR People, to talk about HR requirements and furloughing facts, the information that you need to know for your business and your employees. We'll then move into section 2 of our newly designed agenda. We'll hand over to Steve Page, Director of Page Consulting, who's going to provide you with the information relating to local business support, and we'll look at various aspects of business continuity, but also how to plan for the future after COVID-19 for your business. Following Steve, we'll hand over to Stella Jacobs, Director of Infolaw, who's going to talk about GDPR policies and data protection and making sure that you're covered for all sorts of data protection issues relating to your business whilst working from home. Finally, we'll hand over to Rachel Alexander, Director of I Can Handle It. Rachel is a workplace mental health psychologist, and we'll be talking to you about the mental health and the management of that for your employees and, most importantly, yourself during this period of time. Throughout this presentation, as usual, we'll encourage you to ask any questions that might be pertinent to your business by using the question function on your GoToWebinar page today. So you should be able to find on there somewhere a question button on your dashboard. You can ask questions freely throughout the presentation. We will log these as we go through, and when we get to our Q&A section at the end, we'll make sure we get an answer to each of those questions. The presentation slides will be available at the end of the session via the Growth Hub, either from the website, or you can request this from the Growth Hub team. And if technology is with us today, you'll also be able to get a recording of this event from the Growth Hub website as well. So that's it from me for now. I will now hand you over to Peter Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that. Okay, so I'm going to just give a quick rundown about all of the different support packages that the government have announced over the last few weeks. So the very first one I'm going to mention is the support for the self-employed. Now, this one is probably the largest one of all the support packages for people who have their own business. It was probably one of the most difficult ones for them to actually come up with, and it actually came about a bit later than some of the others, but it's extremely important, and it puts the self-employed on the same par as most employed people. So what does it do? Well, it allows self-employed people to get a taxable grant of 3 months of their profit. 3 months of their profit, they'll get a taxable grant in June. Now, what that actually means is the government will look at your 2019 tax return. So this is the tax return you should have had in January this year. They look at that one and any previous tax returns you've got and work the average profit that the business has had each month. Once it's worked that out, you'll get that as a taxable grant in June. A few things I'm going to say very quickly on this one, a few very important parts of this one. This one differs from the job retention scheme in the fact that you can still work, you can still operate the business as a self-employed person and still receive this support. So the key thing here is what the government are trying to do is trying to make sure you can keep going out and you can keep working and you can keep the economy going. So do keep the business going in the best way that you can. Go out, market it, go out and do some work, keep going with this. How do we apply for this? Well, the government has all of the information because you've submitted your 2019 tax return. This is a tax return in January, remember. You've submitted that, so they have all those details, so they will contact you with further details if you are eligible for it. A couple of things here. if your turnovers, if your profit is over 50,000, it doesn't cover you. If you haven't submitted a 2019 tax return, I'm afraid it doesn't cover you. And if you're a limited company, I'm afraid it doesn't cover you. But what I will say, if you're a limited company, do have a look at the job retention scheme, because it may be possible for you to be furloughed under that and receive some income. Next one I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk more about the sort of business rates relief and the tax deferments that we've got, simply because of cash flow for people who are experiencing issues at the moment, self-employed being probably one of the main groups. So if you've got little income coming in or reduced income, you need to look at cash flow. Cash flow is important. So a few things that have come about to help that the government have put in place. Well, the first one I'm going to mention is tax and VAT deferments. So tax and VAT deferments, this allows businesses to access some cash that they've put aside for tax payments to help them in terms of cash flow. So most people, if they're self-employed, will pay their tax in two sums, one in January, one in July. Well, it allows you to use that July payment for cash flow at the moment. Because what the government have said is you do not have to pay that July payment until January next year. So normally I wouldn't say at all, ever use your tax money as cash flow. It's not good practice, but in this situation you might need to. But remember, when that June payment comes in, you really do need to replenish that so that you can pay it in January. It's not a case of you're not going to pay it, it's just a deferment. It's the same with VAT, works the same with VAT. Business rates relief, if you're in one of the industries that are affected, so it's hospitality, it's nurseries, things like that, you will get rate relief on the 2020-2021 period. So what that basically means is you won't have business rates to pay, again helping cash flow. I do know, speaking to a couple of local authorities this morning, they are reissuing those bills at the moment to show that. So if you've received a bill, you'll be receiving an updated bill fairly shortly. Now talking more about the loans, and again cash flow comes into it. Two of the main loans that are out there at the moment are the business loan interruption scheme. So this one's been about from the very early stages, and it's open to all SME businesses to help support businesses. So it's there so that if you've got a genuine cash flow need, you will not go without a loan. It is a case of applying through the local banks. Your main high street banks will have access to this, as well as other banks like Starling Bank. I know they've now been accepted to be able to issue these, but there are also second tier lenders, as I call them, people who are the just main lenders. So that's all they do. They're community lenders. One of the things I'm going to say here is shop around. The first port of call always is your main bank, because they have your information. But do shop around, because they will have different criteria. It is a loan. Applications processes are still the same, and you will need to show the viability and your ability to pay this back. The government are backing this, but they still want to support viable businesses, and it's there to stop viable businesses not being able to get funding. Another one that's been launched is a new future fund. So this was announced on the 20th of April, and it's aimed at businesses that can't access some of the other support. One of the things I say, this is for the more speculative, innovative businesses which can't access the business loan interruption scheme because they can't necessarily show the viability going forward. So it's more looking at that tech innovative sort of businesses. The new one which has come out is these bounce back loans. I'm sure people have come across these, only at launch this week. They go live next week, and this is meant to be the easy, simple loan scheme compared with the business loan interruption scheme. So there's been a lot of criticism about the fact that some of these loans are quite difficult to get. So bounce back loans are there up to a maximum of £50,000 or 25% of turnover. It's meant to be an easy process. The government are looking for like a 2-page application form to be able to access these, with payment within 24 hours of application. the government will cover any interest for the first 12 months, and you do not need to pay back anything for the first 12 months. So you have a holiday in terms of payments. So what this means is for small businesses, for accessing a small level of funding, you may well be able to access the funding at no cost to you. If you can pay it back within 12 months, it will be at no cost to yourself. Again, it is a loan. It is still a loan, still the same processes in terms of loans. And it's the high street banks which will be administering this. It is fairly early days. It goes live 9 o'clock on Monday. And I'm sure in the next coming days, we'll hear a bit more about what the interest rate is, how things are going to work. But at the moment, it is very limited in terms of the information we know. But free or government are covering any interest for the first 12 months. You don't have to pay anything back for the 12 months, and a maximum of £50,000. Okay, for those of you who have maybe had a large drop in income, I'm going to talk very quickly about what support is available through the Job Centre and Universal Credit. Some of you may well, again, have to look at Universal Credit as an option to see you through to especially the June payment if you've got to wait until June, because that's still quite a long way off. It does support people who are self-employed, so you can be on Universal Credit and self-employed. And one of the things I'm going to say here is if you are applying for Universal Credit, do not say your business has closed down. What you want to say is you are still trading, and what they'll do is they'll take into account any income from the business. And if that is zero at the moment, then that will be zero and your Universal Credit payment will increase. If you are self-employed and going to receive the payment in June, then you may well have that month or that time, because it's a taxable income, so the business has earned that large 3-month lump sum that will reduce your Universal Credit to a lower or probably a nil claim in that month. One of the things for everybody here to do, if you're looking at any of this, I'd say go on the .gov.uk website, have a look at the benefit calculator there, and it will show you what benefits are available, including Universal Credit and how to apply for them. To apply for Universal Credit, there has been a huge number and a large increase in applications. So it is online, and do be patient. The numbers, the calls are, the call centres are overwhelmed at the moment. Online, they are working as hard as they can. They've redeployed staff from other areas and working sort of longer hours to try and get these claims through. So just a very quick recap here. Universal Credit, you are able to claim and be self-employed, and it will flex with any income. If you're going for the you're eligible for the self-employed support scheme, you can still work. And there are cash flow loans available to help you from the business interruption scheme, the future fund, and the new one, which has just come out only this week, which is meant to be the easier and the simple option for very quick finance. As Paul said, if there's any questions on any of this, more than happy to answer them at the end. But thank you very much. I'll pass you back to Paul.
That's great. Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, moving swiftly on then to our next segment, which is from Mike Byrne, to talk about finance and legal updates. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Peter. It really starts my input to think about the support that is available. Every week there's more coming on stream, and I think that's a sign that you need to look into that and make sure you take the most of that help. We're all familiar with the phrase "stay home, save lives." It's a very important, simple message that has obviously had a very important role to play in the current situation. Financially, of course, thinking about your business, I could easily think of similar simple phrases. It sounds like they're common sense, but in so many circumstances where there's a panic of some sort, people don't normally think as clearly and as quickly as that, and a simple, strong message is important. So from the point of view of your business finances, I'm going to look at cash flow as the important element of keeping your business, either keeping your business alive or putting yourself in a position to recover from this business interruption. And I'm going to think in terms of the economic impact, and it's an assessment of it that you need to make, the action you need to take now, and the things you can do for the longer term. So we'll go through those in turn. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So the economic impact, well, figures are now becoming quite familiar that demonstrate, provide evidence for the changes that have happened or the results of the business interruption caused by the COVID-19. These figures, these statistics are largely from the very beginning of the business interruption. And I've taken three pieces of data for a talk about the economic impact. The clear fall in retail sales, but the movement online is demonstrated there by the Office for National Statistics. We're seeing online activity increase, and there's the evidence behind it. We've seen research from PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, firm of accountants that has analysed customer perceptions, and they found that there is significant evidence that businesses that actually behave well in this situation as regards their customers will benefit later on. And then there's something I think the most important in this section there, the third part, is perceptions about what people are going to do after the current restrictions are eased or removed. And you can see that bars, pubs and gyms are particularly susceptible to a perception or that customers will not be comfortable in those situations, even as social distancing measures are reduced. So depending on the business that you're in, you can see there's gathering evidence that you can use to determine how you should react in the future and right now. And it's that immediate impact on your cash flow that has led to all the government assistance schemes that Peter has outlined. They all exist because cash flow has been hit. Sales have fallen off like a cliff for many businesses, and as a result there's an immediate need for an injection of cash, and those schemes are helping with that. But there's more that you can do yourself as a business owner, and I want to talk about some of those things now. So if we move on to the next slide, I've tried to drill down to some of the things that might impact on the income you're receiving. If you take advantage of those schemes, you'll provide some income into your business. But many people running businesses will be in a position where they are owed money and they haven't been as keen to collect it, or haven't been as thorough in collecting that money because the situation didn't call for it. And there's evidence in the business media that a lot of small firms are under pressure to drop their prices or waive their charges. Obviously a very difficult thing for businesses that are already under pressure not to have the income for work that they might do. So how should they react? In any circumstance, cash flow is a very important part of running a business. I want to remind anyone running a business, and I always do in my role, that the price you charge is an expression of the value you put on your service or your products. And if you reduce those, you devalue what you do. That maxim applies at all times, and it certainly applies in the current situation as well. There are three things that you should remember. There's almost golden rules really about what you charge people, the prices that you charge now and going forward, but particularly now. If you feel under any pressure to reduce prices, or if you feel that the price you're charging doesn't reflect the value, then emphasize in your promotion and in your contact with your customers the benefits of the service or the product that you provide. Stress the value of a continuing business relationship with you. If someone changes you as a supplier, then they have to start again to build the business relationship they have with you, and make sure they're actually aware of that should you refuse or resist the pressure to reduce your price. And maybe a slightly different step, the third step, is to offer your customers the option of delaying part of the payment if you can. We've heard many people contrast some businesses that are doing well in this current situation and those businesses that are doing badly. Not everyone is entirely short of cash. So remember that you can collect money that you're owed in this circumstance. Doesn't mean that you can't. It's unpleasant to talk about money and to send out your invoice in this current situation, but it is essential to your business and essential to your own living standards. If you do have to reduce your prices, if you do have to discount your prices, then ask for something in return, maybe a commitment to a longer period of time under which purchases are made. And continuing custom could be what you get in return for lowering your prices. It's so much easier to keep a customer than to get new ones. And we'll, after the restrictions are over, when things get back to something nearing normality, the same principle will apply in connection with what you can charge. You reflect the value. Adding value to what you do is the best way to hold your profit margin. If I can have the next slide, Paul, we'll talk about something a bit further ahead in terms of managing your income and getting payments into your business. You know, that important side of generating revenue so that you can pay expenses. I've said it before, I'll say it again, use a cash flow forecast to enable you to ensure that you don't see expenses as a big surprise, that you plan your way through and beyond this period of business interruption. Sole traders and partnerships can use the cash accounting basis of presenting their accounts. That will have an immediate or natural way of reducing or dealing with bad debts. Obviously not available to limited companies who will account for tax and account for income when they actually make sales. An ongoing issue for businesses is to make sure that customers have the ability to pay. Well, that's more important than ever now. You can use a bank reference or the information on Companies House to help you with that. Many businesses don't ask for their money up front and don't ask for a deposit. Of course, they don't get one. It's simple. If you ask, sometimes it will be that you are able to get money in advance in many circumstances. It's better to have the money in your bank account, especially when you start then having to pay for materials and having to pay for goods. If you do have to give credit, and it may be the first time you've ever had to, then make sure you realize that your invoices need to make the payment terms clear. Set specific dates for being paid. Don't rely on 30 days or 60 days as a measure of when you should be paid. Say specifically the date by which you expect to be paid. Send your invoices out promptly. Avoid just sending them to an accounts department with no name by email. It's much easier to deal with someone you know or someone whose name you have if you intend or expect to pursue your payment for your services. Follow up late payments. Don't let them, don't lose any time. Follow up your late payments. It is your right and your money after all. Send statements, reminders if necessary. Moving on then to the legal framework, if I can look at the next slide, you'll see some things I think are going to come up in a minute now. That's it, about the legislative framework in which you operate, which has recognized that this is a situation where people are short of disposable income and short of funds. And so legislation has been introduced to stop the whole process of being evicted from commercial premises because you haven't paid rent. Made it easier anyway to handle by providing a restriction on the eviction unless 90 days or more rent is owed, and a specific date of the 30th of June for the forfeit of leases. Peter's mentioned tax and VAT postponement, which has long been the case with HM Revenue and Customs. And thinking about things in overall terms, we've all got to be reasonable, and that applies to your the people you do business with and the way you do business. Debts are debts, payments have to be made, but we all have to recognize the circumstances that people are in. A little known point is the Companies House in particular have extended the time you have to submit your company accounts by 3 months, so long as you ask for that before the time is due. And these kind of things are there to help you, and I would urge any business to take up the support that's on offer, to manage their cash carefully, and hopefully they will see themselves through this period and beyond. But just one final thing, remember, you and the business are not the same thing. The only way you can survive is to stay alive, but your business can die tomorrow, and you can be back running another business in a week's time, in a month's time. You can be back running the same business or a different approach to the business you have now. You started a business before, you can start it again. And that's the most important message to have in your mind when you're managing the income which you're losing at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike, for that presentation. Look at those updates once again, and to look into more of the detail about the cash flow side of things. Very handy. I'm now going to pass over to Kellie to talk about furloughing and employment law. Over to you, Kellie.
Hi everybody, hope you're all keeping well. Really just wanted to cover off some of the kind of common questions that we get. So we are an independent HR consultancy company, so we deal with a lot of clients. And at the moment, I think it's kind of unprecedented times for everybody, and trying to work your way through the employment law landscape is quite difficult and challenging. If there are questions that people have that I don't cover here, please do feel free to pop them in the chat, and we can cover them off at the end in the Q&A. That's not a problem at all. So first off then, accessing the job retention scheme. So the scheme is now open, and you can make claims which are backdated to the 1st of March, and you can make claims at least every 3 weeks. Now the scheme is open to employers who are experiencing difficulties with relation to Covid-19, so potentially they don't have work for their staff. It's also open for employers who have staff who have presented with shielding letters, and perhaps those individuals can't work from home, so they can also use the job retention scheme. Or if you have staff that have caring responsibilities, so again, there is no option for them to work from home and they're unable to get into work. So again, you can use the job retention scheme for those groups of individuals as well. Do you need to get employees to agree to furlough? Yes, you do. Even if you have a contract clause that says you can furlough people or lay them off, it is good practice to write to the individuals to say you're going to be placed on furlough, and what will be happening with their pay during that time. So whether they'll be receiving the 80% of their pay, or whether you'll be topping that up, and what a review period you're going to put in place. And you need to keep copies of any communications relating to furlough for 5 years. Okay, so just be mindful of that. Do I have to pay 100% of wages in order to claim for the job retention scheme? No, you don't. You only have to pay 80% of wages, and that is capped at $2,500 per month. If you do opt to top up to 100%, you will be liable for that difference, so you won't be able to claim that back. With relation to sort of what you can claim back any kind of NI or pension enrolment contributions based on the 80% that you pay, so you can claim those amounts back. Another question we've been asked is, can I rotate employees on furlough? Yes, you can. And this is quite a nice thing to do if you do have the opportunity. So it's really quite simple. You'd sort of perhaps cut your workforce into Group A and Group B, and then you swap them around. You do need to ensure that each length of furlough is for 3 weeks minimum. So you'd have to place sort of Group A on furlough for 3 weeks, and then swap them around, so then Group B would go on for furlough for the next 3 weeks. Can employees undertake work during a period of furlough? There are several different answers to this question depending on the context in which it's asked. So if you're asking it as you employ somebody, and can they undertake work for you as an employer if you're the one that's furloughed them, the answer is no. You should actually, when you confirm to somebody that they're being placed on furlough, advise them that they must cease any work in relation to you as an employer. If that person has a second job, they're still able to work for that second employer. If the situation arises that an employee that you have furloughed comes to you and says, okay, to top up my finances, I would like to take up some additional work during the periods that I'm on furlough, you can agree to that. Again, put it in writing so you've got some form of consent to say, yes, I've agreed to it. But you also need to make it very clear that once the period of furlough is over, that person will need to make themselves available to come back to work for you again. And as well, if there are any situations where there may be conflicts of interest, and we need to make people aware of that as well. Okay, so it is something that you kind of do need to think about. If somebody undertakes training during a period of furlough, that's not technically work, so they are allowed to undertake training. If somebody does do that, you will need to ensure that they are paid the equivalent of national minimum wage or national living wage, whichever is relevant to the age, for that period of training, okay? Can annual leave be taken at the same time as furlough? Again, this is a very common question that we're getting. Yes, it can. So if somebody requests to take annual leave, you can grant that. You are then required to top up their pay to 100% in the periods they are taking annual leave. Now, there is a bit of a grey area around, are companies allowed to enforce annual leave on employees at this time? Now, some contracts of employment do have a clause that say that you can enforce and ask people to take annual leave at certain times. Now, the grey area is coming into play because of the working time regulations, which stipulate that annual leave should be taken at a time when somebody would normally be at work, and it should be meaningful time off. So there is kind of a grey area as to whether or not this would be deemed an appropriate time to take annual leave. So it may be that if you do find yourself in a situation where you are asking staff to take a portion of their annual leave, that you actually get their agreement to that, and that they are signing something to consent to say, yes, they are happy to take their annual leave at this time. But as I say, it is a bit of a grey area and it's something that is still under review. Do I need a home working policy for temporary home working? It's always good practice to have a policy in place which kind of sets out the parameters for everybody. Again, we've had clients that they've had staff ask around, you know, how will I be communicated with? What can I claim back via expenses? So in relation to potential utility bills, you know, how they should manage GDPR. And again, that's something that Stella will talk more about later on in the presentation. So it is good to kind of have a home working policy that kind of sets this out so that everybody's clear on how all these different elements will be managed. And then last but not least, we're getting a lot of questions now around making redundancies and when consultation should start. One thing I would say is that the job retention scheme has been put in place as an alternative to redundancies. So, you know, please try and take advantage of this scheme for as long as possible if you are in a situation where you know you're going to have to make redundancies. If you are in a situation where you do need to start considering making redundancies, then obviously, depending on the amount of staff that you're going to have to make redundant, there are certain consultation periods that you have to observe. So if it's 19 staff and below, there are no official consultation processes that you need to observe in relation to time, but it is good practice to go through a basic consultation process with somebody. If it's 20 or more, or 20 to 99, it's 30 days consultation that you need to observe. And if it's 100 or more, it's 45 days consultation that you need to observe. But in any case, it is always best practice to kind of map out the process and include consultation within that. One thing I would say around notice pay is if you are in a situation where you're making redundancies within the furlough period, somebody's statutory notice pay is protected. So therefore, any statutory notice, that person will receive their full pay. If, however, their contractual notice period supersedes that, so for example, they may be entitled to 6 weeks statutory notice, but they're on a 3-month notice period. If that falls within the furlough period, then it would be their contractual notice pay, and therefore, if you have reduced their pay down to 80%, that furlough pay would then be the remainder of that notice period. So it's just one thing to be mindful of and check, and obviously include in any kind of calculations that you're doing if you are considering redundancy. But if anybody has any other questions that I haven't touched on, or they want further information on any of the questions that I have touched on, please pop it into the questions section and we can cover that off at the end. You can have the next slide, please. Okay, so again, we are working with a lot of clients that have remote workers. So just a few hints and tips here on how to kind of manage teams remotely. I think really communication is key. So I think it's important to remember, you know, communicating with people that have been furloughed as well as those that are still at work. You know, people that have been furloughed are sort of sitting there, they probably are feeling quite isolated. So do make sure you pick up the phone to those individuals and kind of say, you know, hey, how are you doing? And try and include them in any kind of work activities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. If you do have staff that are remote working, it's really, really important that you kind of have, you know, an agreed communication platform and that everybody knows how to use that. Focus on output, so really focus on setting targets for those individuals and giving regular feedback. That is really important, so that people feel like their contribution is valued and that they know that, you know, it's not a one-way process, that they're submitting work, that they're contributing, and that they're getting that feedback to keep them engaged. I think it's really important to provide a space for everybody to meet. So as I say, those who have been furloughed, those who sort of are remote working, and those as well if you do still have people in the workplace. So an informal place virtually that everybody can meet for catch-ups. Some of our clients have been doing some really nice things. So they've been having quizzes, lunch and learn. So this is a nice thing to do. You may not be able to provide lunch for everybody, but you can kind of say, you know, grab a sandwich, grab a coffee, log on for an hour, and here's a topic that is key to our business, or maybe health and safety topic, that you can do sort of an hour's lunch and learn just to kind of keep that engagement. We've also seen people getting families involved, which is again a really nice idea. So it may be that you have an art theme and you can kind of throw it out and say, you know, to the kids, everybody can, you know, upload their kids' drawings for this particular theme, and you can pick the winner of the week and have sort of photographs of the winner of the week and give out prizes. And again, you know, it's just a nice way to keep people involved and engaged. I think as well, you know, Q&As and updates on the employment relationship. So if people are asking questions, you know, take them, generalize them, put them on a Q&A that everybody can access, because if one person's asking the question, you're guaranteed other people will have the same question. So be really transparent and kind of be open and honest around the processes that you're going through and how it impacts everybody. And again, I think communication from the top around how COVID-19 is impacting the business and what that's going to look like going forward. You know, be as open and honest as you can. I think at this point in time, it's real key that, you know, employers are doing the right thing, and employees and people out in the job market will remember that. They will remember how employers reacted and how they were treated. So it really is key that you're kind of there giving them the communication and the guidance that they need to get them through this tough time. So again, if I can have the next slide, please. Thinking about the return to normal, and I use this term very loosely, and there's been lots of speculation as to when it will be that we return to normal, or sort of, you know, as what normal will look like. But I think now is a really good time to start taking stock, and we're having lots of conversations with businesses around what that really means. So again, just kind of touching on the kind of restructuring and perhaps redundancy element of it. I think a lot of organisations are realising that now is a good time really to look at the structures. You know, what job roles are there? Is the structures relevant? Are the job roles relevant? What changes need to be made? One thing I would say is if you are in a situation where you're recognising that actually you do need to downsize or you do need to change the structures of jobs, that there is employment legislation that you need to follow to do that. So do make sure that you take advice before you embark on any journey down that route. Again, we're kind of having lots of conversations around working practices, locations of works, and I think really kind of taking an opportunity here to look at, well, actually, where can we make the most of the experiences that we've all been through over the last few weeks. So we have a client who actually, up until we were all thrust into the world of remote working, was struggling with their current location. And that is kind of, you know, the size of the office space they had available, but also sort of attracting the talent and the skills that they needed to support their business growth plans. And now they're kind of looking at thinking, well, actually, you know, we do know that we can work remotely, which has thrown open a whole new world for them. So they're now looking at how can we change our working practices to make sure that we can attract talent from across the UK that we can support remote working. You know, how can we engage people? And they're realising that actually the office space that they have is now, well, how can we make this into a hub so that we have somewhere that people can come to engage if they want to, when we're all allowed back out of our houses, but to balance that with home working. So I think there are really lots of nice wins that can come out of this situation, and now is really the time to start looking at that, say, okay, how can we take advantage? Another thing that we've kind of noticed is the fact that I think people are realising we don't need to travel as much as we have been doing. And the amount of savings that that's giving businesses at the moment. So again, it's looking at, you know, going forwards, and when we return to the normal, should we be traveling as much? Moving on to the next point, you know, asking everyone for feedback and what can you learn from this experience, I think is key, and it's probably something you should start asking now. We don't know how long we're going to be in lockdown for. It may be another 3 weeks, maybe another 6 weeks. We just don't know. But asking that question around what you can learn now. Again, we've had clients that have been struggling with culture, and then up until this point, they've sort of been thrown into this world of all hands on deck. You know, the furloughed staff, they're down to a skeleton staff, and actually the behaviours that they had found were missing in their organisation has now come to light. People are rolling up their sleeves, getting stuck in, a lot of camaraderie, and it's really, you know, how can you grab a hold of that and make sure that you keep that within your business? So the good stuff that is coming out of here, the stuff that's really the grit of your business, how can you keep a hold of that and make sure that it is something that when you return to the norm, stays with you? So it's really worth thinking about, you know, how you keep hold of that. The actual return to work, again, it is really worth starting to think about now, what does that look like when we get to that point, and what do you need to start planning for? So whether that's sort of social distancing, PPE, what health and safety do you need to be sort of adhering to? If you have staff that are sort of shielding now, how are you going to support them in a kind of a phased return to work? So kind of thinking about that and planning that through is really something to start thinking about now. And then lastly, the kind of the mental health aspect of this. I think when we get through the end of this, it's going to have touched everybody's lives in one way or another. And I know Rachel's going to be covering a bit more around kind of mental health support. But it really is, again, something that you need to start thinking about now. How can you support staff? And there's going to be lots of aspects to this. There will be kind of the bereavement side, because people will have lost somebody through this. There's also the survivor syndrome, not only from a sort of a physical survival, but also if you have had to make redundancies and you've people going back to work and their colleagues are no longer there, how are you going to manage that piece? And then again, you know, fears about the future and infection and further outbreaks. People are going to be worried about coming back into the social element of this. So how are you going to manage that and support people? So these are the things you can start thinking about now and kind of planning for the future. So as I say, if there is anything that you want further information on that I have covered in these slides, feel free to sort of pop them in the questions and we can cover those off at the end. But thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Another good update on week 4. Building on the information, I think some really important information there to be planning for over the next few weeks. Certainly, as we are starting to hear whispers now that things might start to get relaxed in terms of the rules. I mean, nobody can know for sure, but you know, certainly we're hearing on the news that things might start to change over the next few weeks. So important to start thinking about the next steps, whether that is redundancies or it's making use of the schemes that we've got so far. One quick question, Kelly, before we move on, that has come from Julie. She asks, can an employee volunteer for their employer if that employer is taking on charitable work, having been furloughed?
Can I look into that one? I'm not entirely sure. I know there are sort of special stipulations around charities. So let me have a look at that and I will get an answer before the end of this presentation. So yeah.
Look at that. Poetry in motion. That's great. Thank you very much, Kelly. That's really helpful. So I'll now pass you on to Steve. So yeah, based on what I've just said, in terms of things potentially relaxing in the next few weeks or so, we don't know for definite, but now is the time to start thinking about the future, start thinking about your business and how you move it on. To help us understand how we can do that, keep a level of continuity, I'll hand you now over to Steve Page.
Thanks, Paul. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you very much. Yeah, what I'd like to do really is build on some of the things that Kellie was just talking about in terms of information being key, but also looking towards that new normal, what the future is, in amongst an incredible amount of uncertainty that we have now. COVID-19 is a new virus to us. It's caught a lot of us by surprise, and it's worked its way around the world very, very quickly. So with all of these pandemics, they tend to be not just one spike, but 3, potentially 4 spikes, where the initial spike, which is the greatest one, develops a certain amount of immunity in the population, but it's often not sufficient to create this sort of herd immunity where a critical mass of people have become immune by having experienced it. So there are some significant risks that lie ahead as we work our way through the life cycle of the COVID-19 outbreak. Just as Kellie was saying, to try to sort of look ahead, put some plans in place, can be critically important and can make that route forward so much more easier and simpler if we've taken a bit of time out to think about what might be coming our way and put some steps in place to prepare for it. And really, that's what business continuity or business continuity planning is all around. So we'll have a little look at business continuity planning. A quick refresher for those who have attended earlier sessions. But if this is the first time you've attended the drop-in, I'll just sort of cover the basics of what it is for yourselves. And then with that in mind, and the fact that we are now working our way through to that sort of towards the end of the first spike in the outbreak, and the potential for some significant amount of changes ahead, then how do we prepare ourselves for the easing of lockdown, and what might that mean to your specific circumstances and to your business? And I'll briefly touch on some of the schemes that are around locally with the Humber Business Growth Hub that add to and complement the national schemes that both Peter and Mike were speaking about earlier. So that's what we're going to spend the next sort of 10-15 minutes talking about. And I'd really sort of implore you to, even if you're not somebody who sort of spends a great deal of time planning, given the severity of the circumstances, to just have a little go. You don't have to go over the top with it. It's the process of actually thinking about and preparing yourself for what might be coming that is more important than creating a thick manual which has got all sorts of sort of plans and ideas. So, business continuity planning, what is it and why is it so important? Well, fundamentally, it's a tool for helping you to manage the risk to your business. And that old adage of to be forewarned is to be forearmed is absolutely relevant and typical of this situation. You'll know yourselves from having just that early sight of something that might have a big impact on you coming towards you, that golden window of time that you can have, which just enables you to put some things in place that either prevent it having any impact on you at all, or more typically reduce the impact that it has on you, can make so much difference. So that golden window of time is absolutely key. If you don't see it coming and it just impacts you, it's likely to do the greatest amount of damage. And really what we're suggesting is, as business owners, we take that bit of time out to try to do some of that future gazing that will help to put you in a stronger and better position than you might have been in otherwise. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who famously said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. Don't put yourself into that category. Even relatively simple amounts of preparation can make a tremendous impact on your business moving forward. So, specifically then, in terms of the nitty-gritty, what is that risk management tool, business continuity planning? Well, it's a process of creating systems for prevention and for recovery. And the two parts are key. Prevention is always better than cure. And therefore, if you can take steps to prevent something from having an impact on you, that is the best thing. Although you'll know for yourself that you can't always protect yourself or prevent something from impacting on you, but even those steps that reduce the impact are worth taking. So prevention, and in the case of COVID-19, not a lot of us have been able to prevent this, although there are things that we might be able to prevent in terms of the disease getting to our employees and into our business and sort of impacting on our workforce or even our friends and family. But in terms of sort of preventing it hitting the country, that's outside of our control. So prevention is the first focus, but also the realization that if we haven't been able to prevent it or prevent all of it, then we need to be able to recover from the impact that it does have on us when it hits us. So those two aspects, firstly prevention, secondly the cure. So fundamentally, an organization's resistance to failure, its resilience, is its ability to withstand changes in its environment and still continue to function. And it's that ability to withstand changes in its environment that is absolutely the key. And what we're saying with COVID-19 is it's an unprecedented situation. We're in uncharted waters, and therefore we need to be looking ahead, thinking ahead, and trying to understand what sort of changes may be coming at us. And with the time that we might have between now and when they hit home, we have taken that golden window of time to try to do something which might either prevent or more likely reduce the impact that whatever those changes are going to be. And we can sort of see the way things are rolling, where the health of the nation and the slowing down, if not eliminating the spread of the disease, is going to be a massive driver in terms of the way things roll out from here on in. So if we could have the next slide then, please, Paul. So having said that, some key considerations that we need to just focus on. There are lots and lots of things that you can do, but let's really focus on the things that are going to be most critical and most important. Because if you get those right, then you're a long way on to things running more smoothly than you might have had otherwise. So planning in a crisis is critical. And the first thing you really, really need to focus on is employees. Now, Kellie's already covered that absolutely rightly, really in some clear detail. So your business, if it's currently trading, will need employees now. And if it's going to be up and running again in the future and finding its own feet, you'll need employees for the future too. So you need to look after the ones that you've got, and you need to make sure that you communicate with them effectively, engage with them. So it's not just communication relating to work, but as a team, as a group of people, in terms of that full engagement. How are you? How are things going? How are you finding it? Is so key, as Kellie illuminated earlier. So really need to get focused on that, and some of the ideas and suggestions that Kellie was talking about earlier really do apply. I'm not going to go through them again. What I would also say, though, is communication and engagement, providing your employees with the tools and equipment that they need to work remotely, focusing on providing them with clear jobs and setting them goals and targets, and acknowledging their performance is all absolutely key. But their mental well-being is absolutely core to their continued performance and engagement with you. So, and I know Rachel is going to cover that in quite a bit more detail, so really looking forward to that presentation later, focusing on this really key core topic in terms of the business preparations around its employees and how you move forward with that, particularly with hygiene, social spacing, and all of those other constraints that are likely to have a really big impact on the business going forward. Another area to consider are your critical processes. So again, focus on the things that really matter. Don't worry about the other stuff too much. So what are the things that are critical to the business that absolutely are part of its core operations that you need to have running and running well? And there may be some new processes that you're having to introduce, which are around remote working and some of those other things that are absolutely key. Now, critical processes aren't just those functions that you need to do to operate efficiently and effectively, but they're also legal requirements and the processes that are needed in order to be able to achieve the legal requirements that you need. Stella will be talking following my presentation about the General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR, if I can get my teeth back in, that are going to be so important that you understand and follow when you have remote working teams, particularly those that might be working from home. So really need to understand what you have to do to be compliant with all of those legal requirements, as well as making sure that the critical functions for your operation are in place too. Customers, your lifeblood of your business. Communication is key. Keep engaged with them. Keep the communications going and understand their situation and their needs, and explain yours to them as well. Wherever it's possible, see if you can find opportunities to continue to support and trade with them, albeit that both of you may need to make some adaptations in order for you to supply them and support them in a way that is then helping them deal with their new situation. But don't forget, your business isn't an island. It is unlikely that it has the capability of doing absolutely everything itself. It's supported with those who supply to you, as well as those stakeholders, those who have an interest in the business. So, you know, things like insurance companies, banks, landlords, all of those need to be kept well informed, so that when you are wanting to get back on your feet again, or you see a new opportunity that you're wanting to take advantage of, you're not going off only to find that parts of your supply chain or other key stakeholders in your business aren't in a position to be able to support you, and it pulls you back. So, quite a lot to do, needs to be thought through. The situation is going to be changing rapidly as we go forward. And the more you can keep on top of that, the better and the more effective you will be within your business. So, almost no organization's ever dealt with this sort of level of situation. So it is uncharted waters, and we need to be clear about that. Could we just go back one slide, Paul? That's it. No, that's fine. Move forward. Thank you very much. So, massive amounts of uncertainty. We've been, what, 5 weeks now into the COVID outbreak, following the lockdown. And we're nearing the end of that first initial peak, where there are some tentative steps that the government are starting to think through in terms of how do we get out of this. Vaccination a long way off still, talking about a year plus, albeit testing is now starting to be ramped up so we can get a better feel for the spread and where we are with things. But the level of uncertainty is absolutely massive, and therefore the need for preparation couldn't be greater. The government have not been able to have a clear path forward in terms of that exit strategy. So what they've done is they've identified a series of tests, 5 tests specifically as identified in the slide. And these are geared around, I'll just put my power onto my system. These are geared around the health of the nation. So making sure that the NHS can cope, having a sustained and consistent fall in the death rate, etc., etc., are all geared around the things that they need to do in order to be able to continue to support their initiatives that they've been driving forward with previously. It's the final one, being confident of any adjustments that would not risk a second peak, that is the one that I think will create the greatest restraints and restrictions on businesses as we start to see some lockdown easing. Social distancing, all of the hygiene factors associated with washing your hands, cleaning potentially contaminated surfaces, all of that sort of stuff that will keep the spread low when put back into a business environment is going to create some significant challenges, which I think is going to make remote working and use of technology something that is going to be around for quite some time, particularly in businesses where that is a possibility. But it's not necessarily going to be in everyone, and you may find that your business is starting at a slower rate, and you might not need that full size of team that you had previously available for the future. And as Kellie touched on, redundancies might be something that you're having to face as you move forward. Better to understand that now, particularly where there are the consultation periods that are needed in order to be able to support them. So, next slide, please, Paul. Thank you. So how do we go about it? So there's a process to go through where we start off by identifying the key threats that might be relevant to your business situation. So, have you a lack of space that might create constraints in terms of social distancing regulations? What sort of PPE might you require? Is surface contamination something that you're going to have to keep on top of and need to have systems and processes in place to deal with? How much money is going to be around? They're talking about the deepest depression ever since records began. So those sort of money situations that Mike was talking about earlier, how are they going to apply? What sort of creditworthiness are some of your customers going to have? How's that going to position you in terms of who you should and shouldn't be doing business with? The government schemes aren't going to last forever. You might see some of those closing at a time in the future. Some sectors may remain in lockdown for a lot longer than others, which might mean that some of the suppliers that you rely on aren't going to be there, and some may not survive this and therefore won't be there at all. So really you need to be starting to understand what all of these potential threats could be, so that you can then assess the impact that they might have on you. So what's that extent and the nature of the damage that some of these changes might have on your business? And in particular, to those critical areas of your business that you really need to protect and have running. And if they are going to have a detrimental impact, how quickly can you put things in place in order to be able to recover? So with that understanding, you can start to see what you might want to do about it. Initially to prevent it, but if that's not going to be possible, then to deal with it and the resources that you might need in order to be able to deal with it effectively. So that's the thinking that you need to be doing. Start with the threats, look at the impact and see what you can do about it. It doesn't have to be a massively comprehensive thing. If you're picking out the threats that are really going to have the highest impact, then that's doing the right thing. Next slide. So in terms of putting a plan together, there are 5 steps that you need to consider. We've just been talking about that threat and impact analysis and looking at the different threats and potential scenarios around it, with a view that you will come up with a list of actions that define all of those prevention or recovery activities that you need to be putting in place between now and when they might hit. So that's the first stage. The second stage is what we call solution design. So we've got a set of requirements that we've teased out. We can do that on a drip feed basis and we can keep adding to them. So what we're really wanting to do is focus on the things that are most vulnerable in our business. So those critical functions, those critical processes, those critical assets, you know, like your people, and like making sure that you're sticking to all the legal requirements that your business needs to observe moving forward, and the steps that you need to take in order to recover them quickly. So don't forget, the first solution or the first idea to solve a problem isn't necessarily the best. So have a kick around, come up with a number of different ideas and choose the best one that meets the various requirements that you've come up with. Having got that clarity, put them into place. That might mean writing some new procedures. It might mean getting some resources in place. It might mean having a bit of cash that you can put to one side to help you manage through the various schemes that Peter and Mike were talking about earlier. It might mean that where you can't cover things down, you need to get a really good insurance in place that will cover you where you haven't got the means or the cash to be able to self-insure. Get those things in place so when you need them, they're there and you've got them available to help you. Don't just put them in a cupboard though. The next step, test them out. Check them out, see how well they work. You know, just in the same way a fire emergency drill goes, you set off a practice session and you see whether or not people know whether they're going to the right collection point, the names are on the register, all the rest of it. Also build confidence and acceptance with the team that they know what to do under the circumstances and they can see why it needs to be done. And then the final stage, just keep on top of it and maintaining it. If there are things that don't work well, update them and revise them. So you're constantly keeping your business continuity plans fit for purpose and in good shape. Next slide. So, in summary, very quickly, prioritize people safety and continuous engagement. All of that great stuff that Kelly was talking around your people, really need to look after your people and observe all of the employment law that you are bound to when making changes around people, restructuring the business, changing job roles and the likes. As I mentioned earlier, Rachel will be covering the mental well-being side of things, which is another dimension that you need to keep into account. That communication is key that Kelly was talking about. Communicate with your customers and all the relevant stakeholders. If you're wanting to move the business forward, make sure everybody is with you when you go forward, and make sure that your and their critical processes are all in place. So some of the critical processes as a result of legal requirements, particularly with remote working, Stella is going to be talking about the GDPR rules and regulations associated with working from home. So really looking forward to that. Highly relevant. Really need to make sure that we get that right. That then moves us on to reshaping our strategy for keeping the business going for the future, or getting it back on its feet, but trading in what that new normal business environment is going to look like. It'll be different for every business. You need to puzzle it out and start to think it through. Where you can, get some of that key information down in some simple documents so that you can communicate it effectively and clearly, so everybody knows what it is you're trying to do and how you're going to go about doing it. Just build that resilience in your business against all of those threats for your new normal. For your new normal business. And again, before they start disappearing, maximize the use of any government support schemes that are around, so that you have an ability to be able to survive this difficult period and go into the next in better shape than you might have done otherwise. So if we could touch on the final slide, please, Paul. What are some of those government schemes? Well, Peter and Mike have talked about them earlier, and they're covered there in the wide range of government support packages, but there are some additional local ones that are available to you through the Humber Business Growth Hub. Go on the website, have a little look, humbergrowthhub.org. And if you look on the Covid-19 web page on that site, you'll see all of these schemes and more. So there's one that is helping working from home. It's an ICT grant, 40% coverage for spend over £2,500. So that's about £1,000 grant that will go towards new equipment to help you to do something in the business that you hadn't done previously, whether it's grow or adapt to these sorts of situations. So setting people up to work from home would be a great way to do that. There's a consultancy planning advice grant, which again 40% helps you to gain access to experts in the region who can work with you to help you build the resilience in your business. There's a grant around financing for growth, and there's the Small Business Grant Fund, which is being administered by the council. So if you've got premises and have been paying business rates or are on the rate release scheme, then the council should have been in contact with you to tell you about claiming for that. There are some businesses that haven't been contacted, who've been paying rates but haven't been on the relief scheme, and therefore haven't been contacted. So if you're one of those, or you believe that this grant should apply to you, speak to your council and understand from them what you might need to do. There's £10,000 available for small businesses there to help them to buffer the storm in the short term and cover off some of their rate fees. There's business support advisors available too. So again, get on the website, contact them, and get some free advice to help you wherever you might need. Good luck with it, and I hope to present to you next week as this whole scheme rolls forward. Paul, over to you.
That's great. Thank you, Steve, once again for a very thorough and practical session there. It's sometimes easy to forget how much support's available, both financially and in terms of advice and specialist support. So yeah, that's great. Again, thanks, Steve. We'll look forward to next week's update once again. We're going to move you straight on now to Stella. for the Director of Infolaw to talk to you about GDPR and data protection. So over to you. I'll just unmute you, Stella. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul, and hello, everyone. This section of the webinar is related to GDPR and working from home. And well, nothing's. Can I have the previous slide? Thank you. So I don't know about you, but I still feel as though I'm in a dystopian experiment. There's still people 2 meters apart queuing with masks and gloves and all sorts of things. I'm still missing being able to go for a pub lunch, but I am really enjoying working from home and all that that brings. And of course, always in my mind, there's GDPR and making sure that the working from home protocols are right. So this week, what I want to do is cover some more about the data protection aspects, such as strong passwords, some encryption, and I want to go through DSARs. And of course, if you've got any questions on this at all, you can pop them into the chat box and we'll answer them at the end of the session in the Q&A. So I just want to have a bit of a recap from last week's session. May I have the next slide, please, Paul? So we looked at GDPR really from both the employers and the employees' point of view. Both need to be aware of data safety, equipment, and obviously communication. The employer, however, must have in place the BYOD and remote working policy, which stands for bring your own device, and a data protection policy for home working. They are different policies and they are mandatory if you have employees working from home. Coronavirus happened so quickly and businesses didn't really have enough chance to implement some of these, but that's not going to be an excuse. Home workers must have them, companies must have put these in place, and you must get them back signed and dated and have them filed away. I also mentioned last week that if you don't have these policies, if you need them, you can either ask the Humber Business Growth Hub for them, you can find them on the internet, or you can find me on LinkedIn and I'll be delighted to share them with you. We also talked about data breaches last week and how easily they can happen, and that they typically come from 2 sources, either from the hackers, which there's not much you can do about, or from the company itself. Because the company's made a mistake. It's unlikely they'll have done it deliberately, so it will be a mistake. So I'm going to continue with that theme a bit later on, talking about passwords and encryption. You might also remember from last week that I gave you a checklist to look at, which are on the next slide, please, Paul. Thank you. So most of that really is common sense. The problem is that we sometimes forget things because we get stuck into a routine or something happens at home. So just try and have another quick look through that. There isn't really anything new to add to that, except that I've been alerted to something called Zoom bombing this week. Zoom is safe as long as you follow their security recommendations, such as using a different password every time you log into a new meeting or you set a new meeting, and don't just have the meeting ID on its own. Always use the password. Make sure you have the waiting room so that you can control admission and to see who's checking in, and just seeing who it is obviously before you let them in. Both of these are settings on Zoom and they're set to default on it. And if you need any more information, please go to their website, which I think is zoom.us /docs/en-us/COVID-19 HTML. And then scroll down to their privacy. But if you can't find it from that, just go to your normal internet, look at Zoom, and you'll find it on there. Right, so on to today's first new topic, which is DSARs. May I have the next slide, please, Paul? Okay, so this was originally known as SAR, the Subject Access Request, but more recently it's been known as the Data Subject Access Request. And basically it means that under GDPR, the data subject has the right to see and get copies of the data you hold on them. Let me just repeat that one more time. Has the right to see and get copies of the data you hold on them. The likelihood of actually getting a DSAR isn't that high unless you're probably a health practitioner or an insurance company. But the run-of-the-mill, so from a beauty salon or an MOT station or something like that, it's unlikely you'll probably get a request. But it still does apply to every business, and every business has to be aware of getting one and know what to do if they get one. Could I please have the next slide, Paul? Thank you. So GDPR states that the data subject has the following rights, and the DSAR is covered in Article 15, the right of access. I just want to recap really, for those of you who are not certain what a data subject is, it's typically your clients, customers, but it's also your employees, consultants, people you work with, people you do business with, anyone who has shared their personal data with you. So that could be data that's on the top of an invoice or anything like that. So it's actually a really long list, and all of these people and all of this should be in your data inventory, which I'm sure you've all got, hopefully. And the more astute of you, you'll probably notice actually that the slide mentions 9 data subjects, but actually there are 10, because I've taken the liberty of adding one, because I feel that you have the right to contact and complain to the ICO, that's the Information Commissioner's Office, if you feel you haven't been treated or dealt with fairly. So that's one I've added in. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I want to go through DSAR actually in more detail. Thank you. So there should be in every business a robust process in place to comply with the data subject access request, and certain paperwork is needed, such as the data subject access request procedure, which will help you define who does what after you've got the request, after you've received it. You'll obviously have the data subject access request form, which is going to make it easier for you to handle these requests, because you'll have a clearer picture of what the data subject really wants, of what that person's asking for, what information do they actually want. You'll have the data subject disclosure form, so you'll know exactly what information to send once you've received the request. So you'll need to look at where that information is held and who's got access to it and who will actually get it out for you. And also a DSAR register, so that you can keep track of the names and dates of when things were asked for from the various people in your business, which department, and when it was sent out to those various people to ask for it, but also finally when it was sent out to the data subject themselves. Right, so we've established that a person can have a copy of their data at any time that they want it. And they can also have some supplementary information if they wanted to. They can make this request in writing or verbally, and they can make it to anyone in the business. So that's, you know, reception staff, a doorman, and anyone like that. They can say, I would like a copy of my data, and that has to be passed on to the relevant member of staff. It can also be done through social media. So whoever's tracking the social media needs to be very aware that they might get that request through there. And whoever it is then needs to pass that on to the relevant person within the business who deals with the DSARs, because you've only got 1 month to make sure this information is then sent back to the data subject. And 1 month really isn't very long. You've got to start hunting here and there for information. There are exceptional circumstances when you can take a bit longer. So the scenario is if they're asking for different types of information and you really can't access it very quickly, but you'd need to let them know and don't make this the norm. So the data subject is also very unlikely to use the phrase, can I have a data subject access request? They're more likely just to say to you, I'd like to have a copy of what information I've got. Okay, so I think for training purposes in the business, it's really good practice to run a seminar and just have a quick idea of what that would look like, and just for people to practice what they'd actually have to do in that situation. It's also common for a request to be mistaken as a freedom of information request, but if it relates to somebody's personal data, you have to treat it as a DSAR. I'd also recommend really having some forms there just in case you get one of these requests, because you're never really going to know when it's coming through. You're not really given much time on it. Also, I think it's really important for you to understand that the request is genuine. In most cases, you'll know that it is, but if you're unsure, you have to ask them for their ID and to confirm who they are, and you'll need to ask for this promptly so that it fits within the time frame. If the situation arises and you can't halt the DSAR process, you can do it proportionally. So if you need to ask them for it, and that's going to take a week, you can send them their information back in 1 month and 1 week. So you can do it proportionally. Okay. You also need to find out from them how they would like the information sent to them, either by email or printed out and sent out by registered post. Or you might be able to give them remote access via an online system that you've got. It's for you to decide, or for you to ask them. It's entirely up to you. So the DSAR itself causes a lot of confusion as to what information precisely you have to give them. And it's as simple as this. It relates to the data you hold at the time you received the request. So this could be data that you've got archived as well. And this is actually then going to be quite challenging, because you've got to make every effort to find that data and retrieve it within the set time. It doesn't really affect the time scale for reporting, and you still have to really do it within the 1 month. You can't ask the requester to narrow the scope of the request, but you can ask them to provide additional details that will help you locate the request information, such as the context in which the information was supplied to you, or how you might have processed it, whether it was via a consent on a web, or whether it was actually direct contact, or the likely dates that you actually processed that data. I have to stress that the data subject is entitled to ask for all the information you hold on them. And of course, it's not acceptable at all to delete or amend any information. And in fact, it's seen as an offence to do that by the ICO. You also can't charge a fee to supply this information to them unless you've really had excessive administration, or if they require further copies. But either way, you need to inform them that you're going to do that, and you need to get it back in writing that they're happy for you to do that. So you should really provide general training for all staff and more detailed training for those who are going to be dealing with the DSARs directly. Maybe have a detailed page in the staff handbook or the employee data protection policy so they know what to do. Keep a record of how many DSARs you have and how many you've got ongoing, hopefully not that many, but how you've dealt with them and all the dates of the actions as they occurred. Maintain an information asset register, which states how much personal detail is stored and where it's stored. And this will all really help to speed things up as and when you get that request. So that's DSARs covered. Right, let's quickly go on to passwords. May I have the next slide, please, Paul? Okay, so these are some of the most common passwords, and this information comes from the National Cyber Security Centre. And thousands of people use nicknames or date of births or pet names or middle names. And a lot of people actually sometimes would substitute an E for a 3 or a 0 for an O, and that's quite common too. But these actually are very easy for hackers to get into. For instance, daughter1 takes 1 minute to hack, as does Fred1234. House star1 takes 7 minutes to crack, and Ewan 1973 took a hacker 2 hours. So none of this is really actually long enough, and it means that your systems will get broken into. So let's have a look at the passwords on the next slide. Okay, so these take slightly longer. And if you look at the last one, I don't even think that's going to be in our time frame, but you really want to try and choose something that's going to be quite obscure. It's encouraged that you don't really use the same password twice, and I don't. I use something called Dashlane, which holds all my different passwords securely. There are other password managers like LastPass or Keeper, and there are many more. But I like Dashlane because it's easy to remember. I've only got one password that I log in with, all the others are stored. So for instance, if I want to go to my next account, I log into Dashlane, I click on the next icon, and it automatically goes to the next website and enters in my login and password details. Also, if you go onto a website and you want to make a new account for something, Dashlane will automatically come up with your username and a new password for you. It can also propagate a really difficult password, such as, I don't know, AD, £5, sign, G4, I don't know, star, sign, asterisk, whatever. No one will ever guess it, so it can propagate one of those for you. It's not necessarily for everyone, but I do think it's worth considering. And if you don't want to use one, then at least have a two-factor authentication. And obviously, never, ever, ever let your browsers memorize your passwords. And of course, at the moment as well, devices and passwords shouldn't really be shared with family members. I know it's difficult at the moment because there are some blurred lines between work and home and social life, but computers or devices should really remain off limits. If you want to check if your password is strong and how easily it can be hacked, go to howsecureismypassword.net. That's howsecureismypassword.net. But I suggest doing this through an incognito tab on Apple devices, and I think Microsoft use in private browsing, and just check how strong it is, and always obviously go through those if you're doing anything like banking. Okay. Could I have the next slide, please? This is an excellent website to see if you've been hacked. So I recommend you make a note of it. It's Have I Been Pawned? PWNED. And it's so what I recommend is go through a private browser, because the last thing you want to do is for somebody to be looking at the system and can see what you're actually typing in. Go to that through a private browser, put in your password, and it'll tell you if it's been involved in a data breach. And it's worth checking that and changing that password to a stronger password. So that's quite important for you. Right, could we go to encryption, please, which is the next slide. I'm by no means an IT specialist, and I'm not really able to give you any specific advice, but I do strongly advise you to use encryption as much as you can. Many phones have obviously biometric technology now, so you can use your fingerprint or Face ID to open up the device. And once in those devices, go to settings where you can get different and more advanced encryption settings. I think all devices do that now, whether it be a computer or whatever else. So try to use the most powerful encryption you can. If you're not sure how, ask your company's IT department, or look at support from the device itself, from the manufacturer, and there'll be plenty of forums and on the topic as well. And another great source of information is the National Cybersecurity Centre website, which is ncsc.gov.uk. That's the National Cyber Security Centre. And you'll spend hours on there once you get on it. There are loads of amazing facts, and there are loads of articles all about hackers and what they're up to. So it will give you sleepless nights, no doubt. Could I have the next slide, please? So just as I finish then, I just really want you to think about what you can do to protect people's data and how you can prevent a data breach. You know, if anything happens, don't be ashamed. Just tell somebody really, really quickly that it's happened, because it's imperative that the business knows and can act upon it. Right, so that covers me for today, really. If you need anything for next week, please let the Humber Business Growth know, and I'll see if I can put it into my session. And thank you very much, and thank you for listening, and I hope that was really useful. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Stella. And quite useful links there available to check our classes and also look at that today's session. Moving very swiftly on now, we're going to straight on to the presentation today, which is Rachel, talks about mental health in the workplace. Just a reminder to everybody, please do log your questions to the Q&A section.
Thanks, Paul. I'd like to move the slide on. Hi everybody, my name is Rachel Alexander and I'm a workplace mental health psychologist. And today I'm going to talk to you about mental health during these times of COVID. If you'd like to move the slide on, please, Paul. So I'd like to talk to you about why focusing on mental health is so important right now, how to manage mental health in others, very importantly, managing mental health in yourself, and how to create a mentally wealthy workforce. Put the slide on, please, Paul. Okay, so the first thing that we need to realise is really what Kellie and Steve have been saying, is that your workforce is your most important asset. And this is really about looking after your internal customers. I think sometimes we can get really focused on making sure that our external customers are treated in a positive way. But actually, you know, more importantly, we need our internal customers, our staff, to be fit for purpose, be able to complete the tasks so that they can service the external customers. And that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. Put the slide on, please, Paul. So why is mental health essential to a business? And probably before we actually talk about this, I just want to be clear on what mental health is, because mental health is one of those statements that we can suddenly start to think about what mental health is. So if you say mental health to somebody, very often they will say things like depression, anxiety, suicide, stress. And actually, mental health in the case that I'm going to talk to you about, mental health, is really just mindset. That's all really what mental health is. It's the mindset of your workforce. So if we start to think about mental health as a mindset, we can see that some people have a mindset which may struggle, and some people may have a mindset which thrives. And what we want is to create a workforce who have mindsets that are fit for purpose, that are absolutely thriving, in order that your business is then going to thrive. So reasons why we really need to focus on mental health. And yes, we need to focus on it at the moment because our mental health may be more challenged at the moment in these times of uncertainty. But in general, we should really be focusing on mental health as a core subject in our business. And the reasons are quite simple, that good mental health is essential to business productivity. And there are loads of research and stats out there and studies that show that poor mental health is bad for business, in that it is costing productivity, it affects the balance sheet. So we really need to be clear on how to help our workforce have positive mental health. We also, as a manager or a company owner, we have a legal responsibility to ensure that we are supporting staff with their mental health. And so the legal responsibility for ourselves as managers, leaders, supervisors, etc., is to be able to recognise some signs and symptoms of mental ill health. know when and how to intervene, and know what additional support is available for yourself and the employee. And the key word there, and that's why I put it in red, is to intervene. So it's not saying that you have to, be the solution to the mental health problems. You don't have to fix, you don't have to solve it. It's just knowing at a time of when it's important to intervene. Thirdly, empowerment. A leader's role is to equip your staff to be able to manage their own mental health. And that's something that we're going to look at in this session. How do we equip our staff to look after their own mental health? And I'll talk about the difference between your responsibilities as an employer and an employee's responsibilities regarding what they're responsible for with their mental health. And finally, why should we be focusing on mental health? Well, I just think it's the right thing to do. And interestingly, a study done by ACAS showed that 73% of employees think it is a manager's role to actually be able to recognise and address the stress and anxiety in the workplace. And again, we'll see how that splits down into stress and anxiety that is created by the work and stress and anxieties that is created by the employee's personal life. So let's move the slide on, please, Paul. So this is how mental health affects business productivity. This was a survey done by CIPD in 2016, and what they did was they researched people who were struggling with their mental health and actually asked them, okay, how does this affect you doing your job? And as you can see there, difficulty in concentrating was actually quite high, taking longer to do tasks, difficulty in making decisions, difficulty in juggling a number of tasks, being less patient with customers and clients, putting off challenging work, more likely to get into conflict with others. So this is why focusing on mental health and helping your employees manage their mental health is so important, because if you have employees that are struggling to do all those basic functions, then your business is going to struggle because tasks are not going to be getting done, customer service levels are going to be affected, internal relationships with different teams, different dynamics, they're going to be affected, decisions are not going to be made, projects are not going to be completed. So this is why now it's really important to be looking at supporting your employees, but generally all the time it's so important to support all your employees. If you move ahead, please, Paul. So in my experience over the last 15 years of going into workplaces and helping organisations prioritise mental health in the organisation, there's a lot of fear originally. There's a lot of fear of why the board does not want to start looking at mental health, or managers, senior leaders do not want to start looking at mental health, and it's because they think they're going to open a can of worms, and that's totally understandable. I've trained in this. I've got 2 degrees in psychology, so I can understand why, if you've not been trained in the world of mental health, you can think it's scary. And so it's understandable that it's like, I'm not going there, I don't want to look at it, I don't want to know what challenges my staff have, because it's not my responsibility. But I think if employers, if ourselves as employers, if we can turn that around and actually see that if we can help our staff have optimum mental health, then they're going to be able to be more productive and they're operating at peak performance. And so myself as a business owner, I want all my staff to be operating at peak performance, so that I know that A, they're happy as a human being, and B, they're also completing the tasks and the projects and meeting deadlines that I'm asking them to meet. So I'm hoping by the end of this session that you will not be scared of going and having those conversations about mental health, because I'm going to show you a way to be able to manage that. Next slide, please, Paul. So yeah, understanding that helping our employees with their mental health, helping our employees with their mindset, means that you are helping your employees to help you. And an analogy I gave yesterday when I was doing a presentation was, if your car is coming up for a service, you prioritise booking it in for a service, because you want to make sure that your car is going to be able to do its job to get you from A to B. You want to make sure that your car is able to function. And that's how we really need to think about supporting our employees with mental health. We need them to be able to function as well as they can do. And mental health is not just about those staff that are diagnosed with disorders such as generalized anxiety disorder or bipolar or anything like that. It's not about that. It's about creating employees who have a positive mindset, who are not getting absorbed by the stresses and the pressures that their mental health is creating. So if we can move on, please, Bob. So what are we feeling during COVID? So, you know, a lot of people are feeling a lot of different things. Some people are really sort of like getting a lot of, you know, reflection time from COVID, yet some people are really struggling with COVID. But I think what everybody is probably feeling is uncertainty. And that's understandable because we've never, you know, been in a situation like this before. And as we can see, the definition of uncertainty is not known. And the way that we work as humans is we do not like to be put in a position where it is the unknown, because that triggers our fear response, that triggers our survival response. Am I going to be safe? Am I going to be okay? And as humans, if we think we're not going to be okay or we're not safe, then that's when we get the adrenaline release, the cortisol release, and that's when the stress starts to appear. So it's common at the moment for your employees to be filled with uncertainty. And Kellie gave some really good suggestions about how to manage that uncertainty, increase communication, getting your team to give you feedback, etc. So uncertainty is what can create mental health challenges. Go on, please, Paul. So when we are uncertain about something, and this can be, you know, anything at all, not just relating to COVID, but at the moment it is increased times of uncertainty, then we have emotional responses. So we worry, we may get angry quicker, increased tension, increased pressure, we can feel overwhelmed, we may not be sleeping. All this is rooted in fear. Our anxiety may be kicking off, panic attacks. In general, we're just overwhelmed with emotion. As I say, it can affect your sleep. And what all those emotions do is they result in increased stress. So your employees may be starting to feel more stressed. So if, for example, they have been used to going into a workplace each day, they've become comfortable with going into work, they know the routine, they know the structure, then all of a sudden they're having to work from home without the supervision, having to learn different ways to be able to maybe just manage on one screen rather than two screens, can't pass over to their colleague to ask a question. What all that can do is can trigger their uncertainty and trigger all those fear, anxiety, etc., which means they have increased stress. So if you'd like to go on, please, Paul. A very basic diagram just showing you how our brain works as humans. So very simply, we have two parts of our brain. We have the emotional part of the brain, and that is the part of the brain that receives data. So if we get an email from maybe our boss, and we're not really expecting that email from our boss or a colleague or whatever, the part of the brain that processes it first is the emotional part of the brain. And so what happens is it'll just process it on a fear response. If it's unexpected, if it's not known, if there seems to be a critical turn in it, our emotional brain processes it first rather than our thinking logical brain. And this goes right back to evolutionary times. If we saw the tiger and we had to sort of like, you know, be increased, have increased adrenaline pumped through our body to either kill it or run away from it or hide from it or whatever. It's a survival mechanism. But unfortunately, what happens is in today's times, we've got a little bit confused. And so we get stressed about things and fearful about things that really do not need that increased fear response. What that overwhelm does, all that uncertainty, that anger, that tension, what that does is it stops our logical brain from working. So it stops our prefrontal cortex from being able to be rational, strategic, think of solutions. And so this is why it's so important to have coping strategies in place to be able to calm that emotional brain down, to be able to access the logic and the rationale. So this is where the mental health challenges can start to occur in our employees. If they are feeling very uncertain, then the stress response is starting to kick off, and this is where we need to be able to help them and the coping strategies to calm down so they can access their logical brain. Next slide, please, Paul. So what is stress? So stress is the perceived demands being placed upon us versus our perceived ability to handle these demands. So what you'll see there is the word perceived, and that's really important. What that means is it's how we are interpreting the situation. So you might think as a company owner or a manager that, well, why can't my staff just get on with working from home? It's quite simple. To them, it may not be. It may not be as simple. So this is where having conversations is really, really useful with staff about how they're feeling about something, because you learn all this amazing intel that comes back that tells you, yes, actually, I am struggling with this. Actually, it's not the norm. It is making me feel overwhelmed. So helping staff to be able to deal with the demands being placed upon them is a really good technique and strategy to be able to help them manage their mental health even better. So why should I be bothered if my workplace is stressed? Well, you need a workforce who have the ability to withstand changes in its environment and still continue to flourish. So that's what we are always looking at helping our staff to do. When I go and work into organisations, we're looking at being able to skill them up so that any changes that happen, they don't get stressed because they have the perceived ability that they can handle the changes, that they can handle the demands. Next slide, please, Paul. So all poor mental health is the way that you think, feel and behave becomes impossible to cope with, meaning you are unable to concentrate on the task in hand. And that's how simple it is. So stress is the first start of mental health starting to deteriorate. And because we don't actually understand how to relieve our stresses, then that's why poor mental health can occur, leading to severe mental health if not treated. Next slide, please, Paul. So where are we at in helping manage mental health? So what you can see from this slide is there's two different responsibilities. So the manager's responsibility is to just have the conversation about mental health, is to discuss mental health, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Managing workload, offering support, being flexible, offering adjustments, signposting for further help, following up and being comfortable with your emotions. So being comfortable by having difficult conversations. What you can see there is it's not your responsibility to solve the issues in their home life, which may be causing mental health challenges. Your job responsibility is just to look at what right now during COVID might be causing them challenges, and what can I do as a manager to be able to resolve that. So, you know, common is heard at the moment of if you've got a staff member that's having to work from home and they have small children, then it's your responsibility to look at how can I help the employee manage the workload while still managing this extra pressure, instead of just assuming that everything's okay with them. The employee's responsibilities is looking at their home life, looking at what personal issues might be causing challenges, being able to take care of their own well-being, physical, mental, emotional, being adult-like, which means being able to have a conversation in an adult-to-adult manner instead of expecting you as the employer to solve the issue, be open to receiving help with professional support, listening to you and being honest with you. So when I deliver workshops in organisations to employees to help them manage the mental health, what I say to them is your manager or your supervisor or your company owner can only help you with your mental health if you are honest with them and tell them what's going on. So that's so important. I'd like to put the slide forward, Paul. So the quicker you take steps to dissolve the mental health challenges, the quicker the solutions come. And obviously that's going to result in reduced productivity issues and preventing deterioration of their mental health. And I always say you're in such a powerful position as a leader because you might be the only person that's actually caring enough to help them manage the mental health, you know, in the home environment. Next slide, please, Paul. So a 4-step process, and this obviously is only a 20-minute session, and you know there is a session that I do that goes into more detail about this, but I'm just going to give you the basic. Creating awareness of mental health, that's simply by talking to employees about the subject of mental health. So that might simply be an email that you send out, you know, during this time, or you do a Zoom conference call or whatever, and you just say, right, let's just talk about mental health. What do you think mental health is? How can we be more aware of our mental health? Going to have a conversation about mental health. That might be on a one-to-one basis, but as a team. And then anything that arises out of that conversation, you're going to list down as actions. What do we need to do to improve the mental health? And then make sure that you review and follow up. So it's a really good idea to include this in personal performance reviews, appraisals, things like that. Next slide, please, Paul. So I'm just going to focus on, how do you have that conversation at the moment due to this being just a 20-minute presentation. Really simply, a lot of you will probably be doing this already, opening a conversation with something like, I noticed you've been a little bit quiet recently and wondered how you are. How are you feeling? You seem a little bit down. You seem to be overwhelmed. Is there anything we can do to help? Yesterday, I sensed you were unhappy and wondered if we could talk about it. Part of my role is to look at the demands being placed upon you at work and wondered if you'd like to give me some feedback. We don't seem to have laughed much recently. How are you feeling about work at the moment? So even if you just take a picture of this screen and just sort of like then look at it and think, how can I put that in the language that is comfortable with me? Then that will open up the conversation for you. Next slide, please, Paul. Next slide again, please. Okay, so let's just quickly look for the last couple of minutes about how you can look after managing the mental health in yourself, because as an employer, as a company owner, it's so important that you prioritise the mental health in yourself. Next slide, please, Paul. So the first one is let go of what you cannot control. So if I start to feel stressed or overwhelmed, I literally draw myself these 3 circles and I look at what is stressing me out and I say, okay, what is in my control? What can I influence in this situation and what is out of my control? And anything that comes in that outside circle, I've just got to let it go. If I can't control something, so at the moment, I can't control when we're going to go back into normal life. I can't control about PPE suits or how many tests there are out there. So I'm just going to let it go. I'm not going to allow myself to get stressed and bothered about that. I'm looking at what I can control. I can control my emotional reaction. I can control where I put my energy for my business. I can control about where my mindset is, keeping positive. So a really good simple way, just draw these 3 circles and let go of anything you can't control. Next slide, please, Paul. So our stress is caused by our thinking. I could do a full day workshop on this. So we all have a voice inside of us, and what would happen if we listened to that voice is we would see the thoughts in our head are usually rooted in fear. They're very fear-based thoughts. We're always looking at the worst case scenario of what's going to happen. So a really good tip if you're starting to feel stress is just write down what your thoughts are or type what your thoughts are, and then just look at those thoughts and say, right, how much of this is fear-based? What evidence have I got that all this is going to come true? And try to challenge the thoughts to see if there's any evidence behind them and try and challenge yourself to turn them into a positive thought of a more optimistic way of looking. Next slide, please, Paul. Okay, have realistic expectations. So using the example here, if you're working from home, you may not be able to conduct the same amount of work, especially if you have young children. So it's about, as an employer, being aware of what's going on for your staff and being aware of when you may need to lower those expectations. And as an employer, it's about being, as an employee, it's about being honest enough to be open with your manager and have the conversation, admit where you're struggling. Remember, employers have a duty of care to support employees with their mental health, but only if they know about it. If our employees are not honest and open with us, then we can't have that conversation. But that doesn't stop us from asking, what do they need right now to help them manage this situation better? Remember to document it where you can to show that you have tried to support your employees as much as you can. Next slide, please, Paul. Very important to balance stress is to look at how can I have fun in my life, how can I rest in my life, how can I play in my life. And so, you know, again, just 4 simple boxes. Draw it on a piece of paper, list everything in the work box. What are you doing that is classed as work? The hours that you work in, you know, going to Morrison's, whatever, that's all classed as work. And then ask yourself, how much am I having playtime? How much am I having downtime? How much am I having relaxation time? You know, and falling in front of the Netflix with, you know, a bottle of Pinot is not always effective rest time. So it's about really finding effective ways to rest, relax, and actually just kick off and have some, you know, distraction away from the work, away from the TV, away from the news. Next slide, please, Paul. And just to finish up, look at how do you effectively relax. So we can all get engaged in the thinking mind. We can all just be locked into that analysis mind. And it's about having appropriate ways to turn that off. And it's not always about meditation and yoga and things like that. It might be, you know, just going for a walk. It might be having a relaxing bath. It might be reading, you know, a positive self-help book. It's about finding ways to effectively relax, not just the conditioned way of, you know, falling in front of the telly or, you know, reaching for the coping mechanism. So maybe ask yourself, how am I effectively relaxing? What time am I turning my computer off? You know, what time am I not going to engage in emails? And look at what am I actually doing to relax. Next slide, please, Paul. So in summary, focusing on mental health is even more important right now. Kellie gave some really good examples of why it's more important right now, because you're going to have staff that are more fearful that may have lost somebody. Looking at how to be aware of managing mental health in others. So you're not there to solve, you're not there to rescue, but the more you can find out about what is causing your staff stress, whether that be caused by home or by work, then the more productive your staff are going to be. And it's about signposting them to some you know, free support, coaching, counselling that is going to help them reduce the stresses that is being caused by home life so that they are more productive. And that's how your staff get engaged, and that's how your staff are present, and that's how you build loyalty. Giving you some very quick ways to manage mental health in yourself. I will be doing another webinar, which will be much longer, 2 hours, on Thursday, the 7th of May at 2:30 in the afternoon. And that will be teaching you how to really focus on your own mental health and how to support yourself. And so please subscribe to those if you would like to be part of that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. One second. Yeah, thank you very much once again for that very insightful presentation. Now going to invite questions to everybody. So if anyone's got any questions that pertain to their business they'd like to ask of any of our specialists, I'm going to unmic our specialists to answer the questions as we go, simply because we seem to have a bit of feedback. So I'll unmic you as we go. I'm just going to go straight back first of all to Kellie, however, to go back to Julie's question earlier on. So Kellie, I think you've got an update for us, haven't you?
Yep. So with regards to charity workers, the rules apply to them in that they cannot work for their employer. So even if they opt to volunteer for you, they cannot do that. They can opt to volunteer for another charitable organisation, but not for the one that actually employs them. On the 22nd of April, around 60 charity leaders put in a letter to Rishi Sunak to kind of have this rule changed for charity workers. So it's a bit of a hold at the moment. I'll keep my eye on it and update people next week. But as I say, keep an eye on the news for anything that may change from that. But at the moment, the rules do apply and charity workers cannot work for their employer.
That's great. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. I hope that answers your question, Julie. Does anybody else have any questions for any of our panelists today? Just while I give you a few moments to think of anything you might want to ask, I'll just share with you the next screen, which is just giving you an update on how you can access further support through the Growth Hub. So on your screen at the moment, you can see a list of the upcoming workshops that will be available online. Our weekly sessions of this session are coming up next Wednesday and the Wednesday after. You can see in between those in the middle is the workshop that Rachel mentioned, which is a managing our mental health guidance for employees. We ran a very useful session yesterday. I think there's quite a lot of very practical and helpful and insightful advice provided by Rachel to those that attended. So you can build on that. by booking on the next workshop on the 7th of May. There'll also be a further schedule of other workshops coming up imminently. What's really useful for us is to get your feedback. So when this session's finished today, if you'd like to give the Growth Hub any feedback in terms of certain topics you'd like to see covered or other types of advice you'd like to be provided with throughout these sessions, please let them know. What I would suggest, as Steve and others have talked about future planning as things might start to change, what I would say is our wonderful and insightful panel of specialists have probably created a level of notoriety and fame and celebrity status, providing advice on your screens from one week to the next. If you want the chance to meet some of these people in person, of course, when we get back to normal, the Growth Hub and ourselves as a collective provide a variety of different workshops. So it's always worth keeping an eye on the Growth Hub website to see what Steve's going to be delivering next, what Kelly or some of her colleagues will be delivering next. There is a wide range of support available from the Growth Hub once things do get back to normal. At the moment, we're trying to provide you with the information we think is pertinent to helping you through this situation and rebuild. Keep letting us know what you need. Looking at the questions, there doesn't seem to be any more coming through at the moment. If you do think of any questions, in the meantime, if you need any further support, I'd recommend booking on to the next week's session and ask your questions then. If you can't wait until then, if it's time critical, please contact the Growth Hub. They'll make sure they get their questions through to us and we'll respond to you accordingly. So that all leaves up me to say, really, just keep checking the Growth Hub website. You can see the link on your web page now in terms of where you can get all the up-to-date information on COVID-19 by visiting that Growth Hub website there. Hit the events page, make sure you're checking there to make sure what other events are coming up. We run quite a lot from our perspective, but there are other workshops available as well you might feel you're interested in. One last point, I think that Stella mentioned about the Zoom bombing. One of the workshops we're looking at developing at the moment is what software you can use, what are the pros and cons of each software for managing your teams remotely, whether it's your staff or your field-based teams. There's a variety of mechanisms you can use. We use GoToWebinars, there's GoToMeetings, there's Zoom, there's Microsoft Teams. We're using quite a lot of these, in fact, if not all of these at the moment. So we've got good experience of understanding the pros and cons to them. So one of the things we're looking at developing, if it's useful, is a user guide, a friendly pros and cons to work out what's the right platform for you to use if we do have to stay with some more sort of this remote working that we've been used to for the last 4 or 5 weeks. I can't see any other questions coming in now, so that leaves me just to say for the moment then a massive thanks once again on week 4 to all of our specialist presenters, doing a sterling job for you, making sure they're keeping abreast of all of the up-to-date information and knowledge that you need to know about. Titans of their own industries, and many thanks from us again on behalf of the audience and myself. Well done and thank you. To the rest of you, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully we'll see you again next week. Stay safe and good luck. Thank you.